He is being pursued by South Africa's spy agency and its shadowy boss. The South African Revenue Service wants him locked behind bars, and he has ruffled the feathers of the country's most powerful man. We're sitting down with celebrated investigative journalist and author Jacques Pauw to talk about the book that has got everybody talking, The President's Keepers, those keeping Zuma in power and out of prison. Jacques, thank you very much for joining us here at News 24.
Pleasure.
I think firstly I'd like to start off by getting some account from you, just an indication of what the last couple of days have been like since the release of The President's Keepers. It must have been quite a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, I mean, I knew before publication that there will be a reaction from the state enforcement, the law enforcement agencies.
Sure.
I did expect them to react earlier. I didn't expect state security to take 5 days to read 3 or 4 chapters.
Sure.
So they were definitely caught asleep.
Yeah.
We were concerned before publication that if news of the book leaks out, and that's why we couldn't do any publicity, is that there will be an application by one of the law enforcement agencies to ban the book. The problem for them now is that they've waited too long.
Sure.
You know, thousands of books have been sold, and it's
the horses bolted argument.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah. So the first few days was already hectic, and we were selling very well, and there was lots of publicity. And then came the letter from state security threatening to shut us down, and then it exploded.
Okay, now the pressure and the backlash is kind of just mounting at that stage. Can you give us just a little bit of a summary quickly, who's after you and for what reason? We know the SSA would like a cease and desist order.
Well, the SARS says that I have revealed confidential taxpayers' information.
Sure.
State security say that I've broken the Intelligence Act by revealing the names of agents and operations and methods and projects and whatever.
Yeah.
And then up to now, there's also a threat from the Arthur Fraser family, who says that I've defamed them and I've made them look like criminals, and I've alleged that their 83-year-old mother is a spy and whatever.
A spook, a paid agent.
Yes.
And you are going to maintain throughout that you've got the goods, you've got the evidence, you've got the research, and you are quite happy for them to come and
it's you know, if you just look at the and it's a long statement by the Fraser family, where first of all they allege that I got my information from a former state security agency advocate by the name of Paul Engelke.
Sure. Which
is not true. It's not where I got the reports from.
Yes.
But anyway, they also call him a Russian double agent.
My goodness.
Now, I mean, where do they get that? Where do they get the fact? Sure. Paul Engelke is a lecturer at the Moscow State University.
Yeah.
I don't know where, but anyway. And then it's also misleading, you know, they say I've said that Mrs. Fraser, who's 83, is a spy. Now, first of all, what I said in my book, and I've got the documentation, is that she was a board member 7-8 years ago. She was a board member of an organization on the Cape Flats that dealt with violence in schools, and that 10 million, and that she was then registered in the PAN project, and that 10 million rand of taxpayers' money went to her project. It's not as though I say in the book that she had to scrounge the Cape Flats for terrorists and gangsters and whatever.
Absolutely, which just ties into the broader wastage and corruption that you unearthed around the network established by Arthur Fraser earlier. Can you go into a little bit of further detail around the wastage? I mean, there's mention of staggering amounts of money that went into the purchase of cars and such wastage. What actually happened with the PAN network?
Well, there was nothing unusual about the PAN network, and that's why Ronnie Casserols, who was then the intelligence minister, why he approved the principle of the PAN, which stands for Principal Agent Network.
Sure.
Why he approved the PAN project. Nothing unusual about it. It's simply an expansion of our intelligence capability. So what they did in the end is they appointed 72 agents. For these 72 agents, they bought just less than 300 cars that they stored in 3 warehouses.
Okay.
And the Fraser family themselves made money out of the rental of the warehouses.
Okay.
But it became quite common for the top structure of PAN that they appointed family and friends. This was a mirror image of what happened at Crime Intelligence under Richard Mdluli.
Absolutely.
Same
Nepotism,
principle.
corrupt
Yeah.
networks.
So they bought an enormous amount of cars. They imported spy vehicles at an enormous cost from Europe. They bought houses. And in some cases they would buy a house and then they would rent it out to themselves again. And the money would be pocketed.
Yeah.
Now you must remember this investigation was not just done by an internal state security investigations team. It was also done by SARS.
Oh, yes.
Because SARS got on board and they started doing lifestyle audits of the different people that were implicated
Okay.
in the fraud and corruption. Probably besides the fact that more or less $1 billion was thrown at this project. Probably the most serious allegation, or probably the 2 most serious allegations, is number 1, that I said to you, Ronnie Casserol's approved the principle.
Sure.
They then copied and pasted his signature on other documents that enabled them to get the money from the financial department.
Okay,
at
so there's a
State
further element of
Security.
fraud.
Yeah, and I spoke to Ronnie Casserols last night, in fact. And he said to me he remembers the investigators coming to him and showing him the different documents. And they said to him, Mr. Casserols, is that your signature? And he said, yes, that's my signature, but I don't know that document.
Sure.
And he now intends to lay criminal charges against them
Yeah.
for fraud, corruption, the Intelligence Act and whatever. So the first was that they committed pure fraud with their copy and paste efforts. And then secondly was that Arthur Fraser had his own personal computer server, installed in his house.
Okay.
So all the intelligence reports from the PAN agents
Yes.
were sent to Fraser's personal server.
Directly at his private house.
Yes, and from there he would decide what goes into the into
Okay.
state security.
Why is that
mainframe.
problematic? Why is that a risk to South Africa's security?
Well, the investigators found that there seems to have been an attempt by him to establish a parallel intelligence network.
Sure.
Because they discovered more than 800 documents that he had kept. Because what will usually happen is that an agent will send his report into the mainframe, and from there it will be analyzed and action will be decided upon it and whatever. But in this case, he decided what went to the mainframe. And the investigators said it was an effort by him to establish a parallel intelligence network, and that he is probably guilty of treason.
Jeez. And do we suspect that, and do you explore the possibility that some of these documents and the parallel intelligence work that Fraser has been getting up to, was that politically motivated, some of it, and specifically was it linked to operations that could have furthered or bolstered the position of President Jacob Zuma?
You know, there were, and I also spoke to agents who were part of the network. There's reports, there's the SARS reports, and then I spoke to agents who were in the PAN network. And they said to me they are convinced that that this was part of an effort to make the Western Cape ANC again. And that there were definitely efforts to boost the ANC in the Western Cape. They didn't have any substantial proofs, I didn't write it. But there were definitely allegations that this was politically motivated as well.
Jacques, globally, I think the workings of intelligence, of a country's intelligence apparatus, that by definition and to a large extent probably justifiably is supposed to be rather clandestine or secretive. The broader public, for justifiable reasons sometimes, is not supposed to know the nitty-gritty of all the dealings. Why is it important for you to expose some of these issues that now appear to be not, to be checked by the justifiable box? And
Well, I think first of all, we can't allow the intelligence services, and let's just talk here about crime intelligence, police crime intelligence, and state security. Both of them have secret projects and secret funds, which is not audited by the Auditor General. It's obviously a massive flaw in our intelligence setup, is that you and I are not supposed to know what state security's budget is every year. We're not supposed to know how many people work at state security. You can't ask those questions, you will never get an answer. And I think with fraud and corruption being so rife at the moment, we have to change the Intelligence Act, for example, to enable the relevant authorities to inspect and to check what is going on at state security. At Crime Intelligence, their secret fund is around 600 million rand a year. State security is much bigger. But at Crime Intelligence, for example, we can see how, we all know that crime is rising. There's an increase in murder, there's an increase in heists and whatever. What is Crime Intelligence doing? If they're doing their job, and there's thousands of people sitting at Crime Intelligence, if they're doing their job, the crime rate wouldn't be this high.
Yeah.
When is the last time you've heard of a major bust of a criminal syndicate? It doesn't happen anymore. So what are they doing with their money? Where's their money going?
Buying flashy cars and nice houses and living it up large.
Absolutely.
So I think then basically what you're saying is that the argument of theirs that, you know, that they are allowed to run these secret projects and that we shouldn't be privy to those details, that falls away when there are clear indications of corruption and fraud and basically...
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that state security can now hold the Intelligence Act and accuse me of breaking the Intelligence Act. They are hiding behind the Intelligence Act to hide their crimes.
No, absolutely.
You know, I think, there's this classical saying, and it was said by Edward Snowden, the American whistleblower, who said, when exposing a crime is treated like a crime, it means that we are being ruled by criminals. And this is what we're seeing in this case, is, you know, it's not going to help to shoot the messenger. Go and look at the allegations and deal with it.
Yes, no. And there's a role to be played by, you know, government bodies such as the IGI, the Inspector General of Intelligence. There's supposed to be a well-functioning and independent parliamentary oversight body that also probes the doings of the intelligence structures. Why aren't they effective in South Africa?
Well, you know, and I deal with the IGI, the Inspector General of Intelligence, in quite detail in the book. And they've been toothless for a long time now. Whereby, you know, I think the last time a report was released by the Inspector General of Intelligence was around the Billy Masetla case, which was
many years ago.
You know, like 2007, around there. Since then, no report of the Inspector General has ever been released. We don't know what the IGI investigate. We don't know the outcome of investigations. And once again, you don't expect them to reveal state secrets. But we have to know that the IGI is effective. Now, I know for a fact when the IGI was, and it was then Faith Khadebe was the Inspector General when the crime and corruption was going on at State Intelligence. I know for a fact that the IGI never, for example, even interrogated the documentation and the evidence. And it was yet it took 3 years for the IGI investigation.
Sure.
Between 2 and 3 years for the IGI to release a report. We don't know what stands in the report. The Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence can't get a copy of the report either. They were just told that, you know, there were a few problems, but everything is now kind of okay and whatever. So, also as far as the IGI is concerned, we need to know what the IGI is doing. You know, the IGI was for almost 2 years, the IGI was completely dysfunctional. There wasn't an IGI.
Before Dintwe's appointment.
Yes, after Khadebe left, there wasn't even an IGI. Go and look at their website. Their website still hasn't been updated for a very, very long time.
Sure.
There's obviously very little going on there. And what we have in this case, for example, when SARS started investigating 10 or 12 top people of the PAN project, it was the IGI. It was Advocate Govender of the IGI that went to SARS and stopped the SARS investigation and said to SARS, don't worry, we're dealing with all of this, you have to close your investigations, which they did.
And it seemed to be quite a dubious plea on her side, because ultimately nothing ever came of the probes.
Yeah, ultimately never.
So on the whole, just a desperate need of some transparency and oversight in South Africa when it comes to the workings of these shady intelligence operatives.
If you look at the role of the IGI and the Oversight Committee, on paper it looks beautiful.
Sure.
But it's once again the people that you have in power.
Yeah.
When Cecil Burgess, for example, was the chairperson of the Oversight Committee, they hardly ever met.
Jeez. Now, Jacques, you also, obviously, you spend a great deal of time in the book, or a great deal of, of the chapters deal with these kind of shady dealings, the spooks and spies that assist Jacob Zuma in keeping out of trouble, and staying out of jail, and getting to his enemies and such. Does it surprise you if you kind of consider Jacob Zuma's background, where he comes from? He used to be the ANC's intelligence head back in the pre-94 disposition. Should we be surprised, I suppose, that Jacob Zuma is conducting himself as somewhat of a spy master, the real puller of strings behind the scenes of all these intelligence projects?
Absolutely not. And I think Jacob Zuma's brutality also tells you where he comes from, and his as far as his role as an intelligence master is concerned, he is masterful. And if we look at the way he's captured the law enforcement agencies, state security, SARS, crime intelligence, the Hawks, NPA, all of them, how he's captured them, it was quite a masterful process, because in order to capture all these institutions, he had to get rid of very credible people like Gibson Jenje and Mo Sheikh and Anwar Ramat at the Hawks, and Shadrach Sibia and Johan Boysen in KwaZulu-Natal, and Ivan Pillay and Johan van Lochrenberg and people like that. He had to get rid of all of them to place his own cronies in place, which he has done.
Sure.
He succeeded.
Zuma, the chess player in action.
Absolutely. I mean, it took him a few years.
Yeah.
But there he is now, and we've seen it with all the work you and others have done about the Gupta emails, for example. All the allegations around the fraud and corruption of the Gupta family. Nothing has ever happened.
Yeah.
If you think about the Public Protector's state of capture report,
Sure.
where's the investigations that were supposed to flow from there?
Absolute paralysis in those sectors right now. I mean, just this morning we learned that Khomotso Pashlane, previous acting police commissioner, will not be prosecuted by the NPA for his very apparent, corrupt dealings with suppliers to the SAPs.
Absolutely.
So that kind of ties into the broader paralysis that you
cars
highlight.
and whatever.
Absolutely.
Bags of money.
Yeah.
Not surprising.
Yeah. Jacques, we've spoken about some of the fallout, I suppose, of the fight back by the likes of the SSA and SARS following the publication of your book. But I suppose a even more ominous kind of fallout now has come in the form of death threats that we've heard about. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I'm still not sure. It's quite unnerving, but I'm not sure how seriously I take them, because I've had death threats before.
Sure.
And I've always said, if somebody wants to kill you, he's not going to warn you that he's going to kill you.
Yeah.
But it's clear that people are angry. You could hear it. I got two phone calls over the weekend. And it was definitely from Cape gangsters. I mean, they were talking Afrikaans, and they were talking Cape Afrikaans, and they was also speaking Afrikaans. So it definitely came from those quarters.
Sure.
And then I had one last night. In fact, while I was speaking to Ronnie Casserols, I could see there was sort of like private number, trying to get through, and I thought it was the lawyers or something at some point. And I said to Ronnie, I'll call you back. And when I took it with somebody who said to me, if you continue writing about Jacob Zuma, we're going to kill you.
Unbelievable.
Now, I mean, you know, what do I give it to Arthur Fraser to investigate?
Yeah, or the Hawks or the police,
I mean,
who's left.
Absolutely.
No, sure. Jacques, that's kind of the one side of the coin. But I suppose a more encouraging and positive aspect, from what we've seen in the last couple of days following the publication of the book, is this massive, support throughout the country that's streamed in. Have you found that to be very encouraging? And
yeah, I've always said that Jacob Zuma has brought us to the brink of a gangster state. If we haven't, we might even have entered the first little bit of a gangster state. But we're in the realm of a gangster state. And I've always said there's only three things that can save us from becoming a failed democracy and a state run by criminals. And that is, number one, the courts. And they have been magnificent. There's secondly the media. And in the past, especially say in the past 2 years, the media has been fantastic. And the third pillar is civil society, who's also been reacting wonderfully.
yeah,
And in the end, it's going to be up to people like me and others to not to sit back and just to accept that we're sliding into an abyss. That we have to do our bit, and I think everybody has to do his bit. And I think this is what this book has done, was sort of like mobilize people against something that they absolutely fed up with. We've had enough of crime, we've had enough of corruption,
Yes.
and nothing is happening. We've just spoken about this. Crime is rising. SARS just said that they're going to have a 50 billion rand shortfall this year. They had 30 billion rand last year. People are hot full of this. They want to see something happening.
yes, and especially I think this makes the work that journalists such as yourselves and other journalists do even more important, because we can show members of the public that whilst there's a SARS backlog or a shortfall in the revenue that they generate, individuals such as President Jacob Zuma is not properly taxed for the side incomes that he generates all over the place.
Yeah.
So do you think that's important for us to kind of keep on showing the people the populace the nitty-gritty of corruption, so that they can actually see how
I think on the one hand, people do get tired of too much exposés and too much corruption
fatigue.
Corruption fatigue, and we saw it with the Gupta emails. Is that after a while, and I'm taking even myself, would read sort of the first 4 or 5 paragraphs. So I think people do get tired. And there is also probably a sense amongst people of, we can't do anything to stop this. Let's, in the little village where I come from, people live in paradise. I mean, they're hardly aware of what's going on.
A bit of a bubble.
It's a bit of a bubble. But I think we have to do our bit. People have to stand up, and they have to support the right party and the right candidates and the right causes.
Sure. Jacques, and you've been doing your bit for quite a couple of years already, quite a couple of decades in fact. I think there are many younger South Africans who probably wouldn't remember some of the earlier work you did, very important work on going back to the 80s, the uncovering of a death squad at Vlakplaas and Terkutsia, and the role played by the South African security police back in the day in terrible atrocities committed in the name of the apartheid government. Having been closely involved with the uncovering of those kind of transgressions back in the day, can you draw personally for yourself, have you drawn parallels in the way that the current security establishment is now conducting itself? Has anything changed, or has it been much of the same?
No, we still have a beautiful constitution. We've got freedom of speech, which we didn't have back in the apartheid years. But I think the behavior of our law enforcement agencies are becoming more and more reminiscent of what it was during the apartheid years. The mere fact that the state wants to ban a book, I'm not jeopardizing any operations or any projects or any agents or anything like this. They simply want to ban a book because it is embarrassing for them. And once again, we have to be very, very careful that we don't slide back into that abyss that we came from. You know, and you know, in Ronnie Casserole says it beautifully in his book, for example, of for God's sake, let's not go back from where we were. And it's going to take an effort from all of us to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously you've been involved firsthand, I suppose, in the day of the Vrije Weekblad. You know, you guys have experienced firsthand what it feels like to be gagged and to be suppressed by government. Is there a sense of disappointment, I suppose, you know, having lived through all of that and then having also gone through, you know, the to a large extent promising era of 1994 and what the future would hold, and a strong constitutional democracy, and one where the freedom of the press would be guaranteed? Is it disappointing to someone such as yourself who's now kind of experiencing again the same, you know, the threat of being gagged and of the
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I took up the pen again. You know, when I wrote this book, Max de Priem said to me, he said to me, you're now going to do your national service for the third time. I did my national service as a young white man who had to go to the army. I did my national service at Vrije Weekblad, and he said to me, now you have to do your national service again. And I think this is what the current government is doing to us. Is we suddenly, people like myself who come from that era, suddenly we scared that we know how bad it can be. You know, can you, for example, imagine that we clinch a nuclear deal of R1 trillion? Now, you know, the other day when I had to write 1 trillion, I had to look on the internet how many noughts I have to put on. I think
1,000
it's 12
billion. Yes,
yeah,
12 zeros.
12 zeros. That's how much 1 trillion is. You know, not too long ago we were still talking about millions, and then now it's billions. It might become trillions. Now, can you imagine that we enter the nuclear deal and we can't pay social welfare grants anymore, and there's not enough money to armor the police and build schools and build hospitals? Can you imagine what can happen with this country? We can have civil unrest.
Absolute
With
uproar and revolt.
with the state clamping down. And yet it seems as though our Minister of Finance, who's a bit of a Zuma stooge, we all know that, even he said there's no money for nuclear.
He's seen the coffers and now he's realized that there's not enough money.
There's not enough money, and it seems as though Zuma lives in a universal, in a parallel universe.
Yes.
And is not aware of what is going on around him. I mean, he obviously doesn't know what 1 trillion is.
Absolutely. And Jacques, I mean, he's acting like a man to a large extent who seems to be beholden to outside interests.
Yes.
If you talk about the proposed nuclear expenditure, we tie that back to the Russians.
Yeah.
But in more specific detail, you've written about financial contributions that have been made to President Jacob Zuma by other business people, specifically South African business people. And one of those that really caught the headlines was a nice little side salary of 1 million rand a month that came from an individual called Roy Moodley, who's a Durban-based businessman. Why would that be problematic? Why shouldn't Jacob Zuma get some sort of a side benefit, just for the layman?
Well, he was paid the R1 million salary a month for a year before becoming president, and for at least 4 months after he became president in May 2009. Now, you can't have a president on a payroll. You can't have a president who's an employee of someone else. And that's probably why when Roy Moodley, and lots have been written about, you've written about Roy Moodley lately, when Roy Moodley had his 50th birthday celebration in the International Convention Centre in Durban, his son made a speech while Zuma was sitting there as the guest of honor. And his son said, and he pointed to his father and he said, he's the most powerful man in the country. Now we know why his son had said that. You know, Pierre de Vos wrote about this the other day, and it's a complete breach of the Constitution, and there might even be criminal intent in all of this.
Sure, but we shouldn't be holding up a breath for anybody in the law enforcement side to actually pursue all of this.
Nothing will happen. You know, I've always said to people, it's not going to be Parliament, it's not going to be journalists, it's certainly not going to be a book that leads to Jacob Zuma's downfall. Sure. The only body that can remove him is the NEC of the ANC, and he employs half of them.
Yeah. Jacques, it's going back to the payments and sort of the money trail. You know, it's a a tax implication and the involvement of officials at the South African Revenue Service and their probes of tax-related affairs of individuals close to President Jacob Zuma and President Jacob Zuma himself, that seem to have played a role in massive, dramas and the undoing, to a large extent, of the South African Revenue Service and its capacity to investigate tax-related offences.
Absolutely.
Do you believe what we saw back in 2014, 2015 was the fallout of these tax officials going after the likes of Zuma and his friends?
Yeah, and I think we must quickly talk about two SARS regimes here. The one SARS regime was up to 2014, and that was the SARS of Oupa Magashule and Pravin Gordhan and ultimately Ivan Pillay up to the end of 2014. And then the second SARS regime when Tom Moyane took over at the end of 2014. And the first SARS regime was prepared to treat every taxpayer in exactly the same manner.
Sure.
Whether he was just a man on the street or whether it was the president. And that message was relayed to Zuma in a meeting in February 2014 he had with Ivan Pillay when SARS was begging him to file his tax returns, which he hadn't done for the first 5 years of his presidency. Pillay pleaded with Zuma to submit his tax returns, and he then said to Zuma, if you don't return it, we will have no other option but to treat you as just another taxpayer.
Absolutely.
And less than a year later, the top structure of SARS was gone. The investigative units were gone. And Tom Moyane and his cronies took over. And SARS today is very much a broken institution.
Sure. Jacques, I think very importantly too, in that broader narrative is the fact that, or to highlight the fact that the media played a very significant role in making sure that these troublemakers at SARS were booted out of the taxman. We're thinking of specifically a series of rogue unit reports that were carried by a prominent South African Sunday newspaper.
By the Sunday Times.
By the Sunday Times.
But it's probably the lowest point in South African newspaper
history.
So
do you believe the media actively played a role in this grander plot to ensure that these individuals were ousted?
2 weeks after Moyane arrived at SARS. Now you must remember in the preceding 6 to 8 months before Moyane arrived, Van Lochrenberg was already removed by basically a state security campaign against him when he had a relationship with a state security, and he's not innocent here, when he had a relationship with a state security agent who's also an attorney.
Belinda Walter.
And she then he fell into a honey trap, and he was basically then suspended. Then Moyane, and then Ivan Pillay was also suspended. And then came in Moyane, and 2 weeks after Moyane arrived at SARS, suddenly the SARS rogue unit reportage started in the Sunday Times, where week after week after week, I think there were altogether 26 articles, very prominent. Many of them were the headline news. Week after week, where they wrote about the fact that SARS ran a brothel, for example, without any evidence. That SARS spied on Zuma. Articles like that, week after week after week. And I remember, for example, the day after they published the SARS brothel story, Tom Moyane said that he cannot allow this to go on anymore, and he suspended even more of the executives.
So he was
and Sunday Times was instrumental in the removal of the top structure of SARS. We all know today that the stories were nonsense.
Yeah.
There was a subsequent KPMG investigation that has been withdrawn.
The press ombudsman has ruled that the
yes,
articles
and the Sunday
were without
Times
basis.
ultimately apologized.
Sure.
The editor left. Some of the journalists left.
But only after the damage really had
yeah,
been done.
the damage had been done there,
Yeah.
and it was a very, very sad day for South African journalism.
Yes, especially if you consider the fact, Jacques, that that is not an isolated incident, and it's not one that stopped in 2014, 15, 16. I'm thinking back recently this year, we've seen reports on supposed emails detailing an affair that Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa supposedly had. There was a series of reports on a supposed intelligence project called Operation Wonder that was also very effectively used to make sure that people were booted out of crime intelligence, and so on and so on. How do we as the media, I suppose, and as authors and researchers guard against becoming these very useful tools in the hands of some very nefarious individuals in the intelligence community?
I think journalists must first of all realize that politicians, or many politicians, not all politicians, that many politicians are nothing but prostitutes in drag, and that we should be very wary what we get from them and what they feed us, and we should be very wary of their cronies. But I think it's also up to readers. You know, readers must be very careful what they read and what they believe. You know, when I just look at Facebook, for example, you often get these posts that people post, and sometimes they genuinely believe it's true, which is just completely fake news. And I think we might see even more of it with a run up to the ANC conference in December. But I think the readers and the viewers and the people who do social media must be very, very careful what they believe and what they read and what they repost and send on and what they believe.
Do you think, having mentioned, the December elective conference and the obviously the bitter rivalries we're going to see playing out now in the lead up to that, should we anticipate even further abuses of these kind of nefarious intelligence operatives and such, in order to further the cause of some of these individuals who are now running for the top positions in the ANC?
Absolutely. We've seen lately. We've seen very mysterious break-ins, for example, in the offices of the Chief Justice and the NPA and places like that. We have these secret funds in the law enforcement agencies. We don't know where that money is going to or what that money has been used for. With the last elective conference in 2012, yes, in 2012.
Bloemfontein,
in Mangaung. A very notorious bunch of crime intelligence officers went to Mangaung with enormous amounts of money. Why?
To buy votes.
To buy votes. And we all know, and it's public knowledge, that Jacob Zuma has his preferred candidate, his ex-wife, and that's why I believe it will be very, very difficult to beat her. Because of the support she's getting from law enforcement agencies. She's already treated like a VIP with a blue light brigade and whatever.
So very ominous sounding. So journalists on the ground in December should keep a watchful eye for these kind of dealings. Jacques, at the rate the book is flying off the shelves, I don't actually have to ask this question. Pretty soon every South African would have read the book, it seems, at this rate. But if there's one thing that you would like all South Africans to know that you've unearthed in the book or that you've written about, what would that one thing be?
That we are just about a gangster state, and please, let's try and stop it and not go there.
Great words there. This is Jacques Pauw's book, The President's Keepers. As I've said, I think you pretty much have to rush to the nearest bookstore to get a copy. They're flying off the shelves. I understand more copies are on the way.
I think it's
busy
available
restocking,
tomorrow.
still available tomorrow. So, Jacques, thank you very much for coming to talk to us.
Pleasure.
It was very informative. Thank you.
Pleasure. Good.